Being on the same page financially is critical to having a healthy relationship. We all know that. We understand, though, Stephanie and I, how living payday to payday and barely making it can cause extra strain on everybody's marriage. And while we were preparing for this episode, we found some really sobering statistics on divorce rates and the reason for divorce. So, look, guys, welcome to Legacy Driven Marriages podcast, episode number 50. What a cool milestone for us. I'm Walt McKinley, and I'm here with my partner in crime, who went over there, Stephanie.
Hey, everybody.
Man, today's episode is focused on making financial goals as a couple. And we're going to talk to you guys. Look, we're not financial gurus. We're not financial planners. All we are is two people who spent over a quarter of a century together, who've been married 24 years, made some pretty good financial decisions and made some really stupid financial decisions. But the one thing we always had was the goal of not allowing our finances to put unnecessary strain on our relationship. So we can't wait to get into this episode with you today. Look, we love that you're also here. So please, please, please just take a moment, subscribe to this episode or subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss another episode. And go ahead and share this with another couple that you think can really use the goodness that we're spreading. Because let's be real, we're not here doing this for ourselves. We're here doing this for you and to help you create a powerful marriage that not only makes your life better now, but changes the generational legacies. So without further ado, we're getting started. So I talked about a statistic a second ago, and I was a little shocked. It was from a Forbes article that just came out the beginning of this year talking about divorce rates in 2024 and the reason most couples get divorced. The third biggest reason people get divorced, what makes up 58%, is conflict and not being able to resolve conflict. And the fifth biggest reason for divorce was financial problems, which make up 37% of divorce. And let's be real, because we've known a lot of couples who argued over this stuff, man. Steph and I have gotten in our little petty arguments over it too. When I think of a conflict making up 58% of the reason all people get divorced, I bet you, there wasn't a stat for it, but I bet you at least half of that comes from the financial strain that being broke, living payday to payday, or worse yet, being in debt puts on a marriage, because the financial strain that both people feel in a partnership will 100% leak over into other parts of your communication and intimacy and other parts of your marriage, which might be good, but that financial strain will put some real difficulties maybe where there wouldn't be any at all if you weren't financially strained.
Right. Look, I think the beginning of the year is the best time for us to talk about this. For us, even Walt and I, we always kind of do a reset at the start of the year. We kind of sit down with our finances and start talking about what we're going to do this year. And we always kind of, even though we've always had a budget, we've kind of always done that naturally. Common sense wise for us, it always made sense. And we always sat down and did a budget. So every year we kind of sit back down and go, okay, well, what's changed this year? Because usually at the start of the year, a lot of us, like, you might have some pay raises or, something different changes. Or so that's when we sit down and say, okay, like, let's look at what debt are we looking at? What stuff do we want to accomplish this year? Because a lot of times that's when we sit down to like plan a trip. And so that requires finances.
And I like that you said reset though, Steph, because everybody thinks resolutions at the beginning of the year, and we all know resolutions taper off. But I love the beginning of the year, and we're going to give you 3 key points as the episode progresses on what you can start doing today. Really basic things that most people don't understand how to do, that we found through our own experiences, that we've had to learn how to kind of do and refine on our own. But I love when you said reset, because the beginning of the year is such a valuable time to reset. That's why episode 49 last week, the first one for the beginning of the year, was how to do goal setting as a couple in 2024 and really prioritize your marriage and your relationship. This really goes right along on top of that too.
Right. We all start the year like, okay, what are we going to do different this year? What are we going to, this is the best time where you feel like this is a new beginning, a new start, get to start fresh, kind of forget what happened last year, or at least hope you can, and start new with what can I accomplish this year that I haven't done in the past? And that's what we're doing all around. Like, not, this episode, we're going to focus on finances. And last episode, we talked about just goals as a couple. And this is what we really do. This is what we're sitting down right now and doing with all of the aspects of our life is like, okay, what is our vision for this year? And what is our vision for the next few years? And we sit down and really start to game plan that. And so we want to give you guys those tools to sit down together as a couple and reach these financial goals that you both want, because we know that this is a big source of tension a lot of times in a lot of relationships. It has been for us in the past. Um, we always have to kind of talk through a lot of this stuff because we don't always see it the same way, or maybe we didn't have the same vision.
Or we like to spend money differently than each other.
And so it's a good time to sit down with your spouse and really talk about how do we get on the same page? How do we get the same vision for where we want to go this year financially? Because this is, you guys know your finances, it really is pretty much a base, a foundation for everything else you're going to do, because you can't do the things you want to do if you don't have the money to do it.
And that's individually too. Even if you're single and you happen to be listening, your finances got to be on point to alleviate stress unnecessarily on your life. Now you're a couple and you're a man versus a woman, or your experiences are different, or just what you like versus what the other one doesn't like. How you want to spend that discretionary income looks different for each individual in that partnership. So it's really,
I got to tell you guys, for Christmas, even this is how different our gifts were. He wanted an Xbox, which entertainment. What do I always say? Guys always want entertainment, some kind of entertainment value. I wanted this hair tool, flex hair tool. You ladies know what I'm talking about. It like dries your hair, curls your hair, does all the things.
Makes it easier.
And literally those two things cost the same amount, but look how different they are in what we wanted. And this is what we face in everything in our relationship, with down to like, there's been times where it's like, he really wanted the side-by-side or the boat, and I wanted the vacation, and like we're shooting for totally different things, and we got to get on the same page.
Well, and by the way, if you're watching on the Legacy Driven Marriages YouTube channel, it'll be really obvious why I don't want something for my hair. You know what's crazy to me? And I think we got to build awareness. Steph and I talk about just some self-awareness and just emotional awareness around everything in your life, because once you build that, you can make really solid choices. But without that, it really just creates a blind spot. There was a sobering statistic that I heard the other day. And I think actually, Steph, I think you heard it when you were listening to Ed Milet podcast. And he talked about, but I've read this before. The average American family is in $100,000 of consumer debt, not their home,
right?
Vehicles,
just credit
card debt, things that we're buying,
vehicles that depreciate, things that depreciate.
Yeah. Things we're buying that most of the time we don't even really need. And by the way, on top of that, take out the vehicle loans. Let's just talk about credit card debt. We're paying nowadays anywhere from 18 to 27% interest on that credit card debt. And we're barely making over minimum payments, which means we'll literally never even pay them off. And so you put yourself in this rat race. It's like a hamster wheel.
But the other piece of that is, so the average consumer or average person out there is $100,000 in debt and only has $5,000 in their savings. So they have way more debt than they actually do cash.
And that's the median. The median is $5,000 in their savings account,
right,
for those moments that happen in life to every single one of us.
That's a scary statistic, because that means like how many of us out there don't have, if something were to happen critical to you, you don't have the cash to pay for.
And I just heard on the news the other day, I don't remember they didn't give the statistic, but they said consumer debt, credit card debt specifically, has grown at the highest and fastest rate they've ever seen since credit card came out. Because we know, guys, like stuff's expensive, man. Just to buy food for your family is astronomically expensive. To even get a vehicle now, you're paying 8, 9, 10% interest if you have good credit on something. So the cost to just live now is out of control. But if you don't keep control over your finances, all you're going to do is add huge strain and continue to put yourself further in a hole, which, let's be real, it just takes time and intentionality to dig out of them. By the way, Steph and I, we didn't, when I met Stephanie, she worked at she went to college. She was a freshman year in college. And I think you worked at like that summer place where they made sandwiches and.
Yeah, it was called the Strawberry Park Campground. It was like a resort campground.
Right. And I was an E3 in the Navy and I didn't even have a car yet. So when we're talking to you today, I want you to think about where we started, which was at ground zero. Maybe for me, it was even less than ground zero because I wasn't taught any kind of financial literacy growing up. And I had no clue what the hell I was doing, except for I wanted to be a billionaire and I wanted to have a lot of cool stuff. That's was my priority.
Yeah, you wanted a home like on MTV Cribs.
Yes. Shout out to all of you over 40 that used to watch MTV Cribs.
Yeah, you all know what I'm talking about. I was gonna say this is why reason why, sorry, I can't talk right now. We are driving home this financial talk is because at this time in our life, the way like inflation is super high, interest rates have gotten high. It feels so expensive just to live, to get by. We know a lot of people are just struggling to make ends meet, to even feed their family, pay their bills. So it's hard to sometimes even fathom beyond that because you're in that everyday struggle. And we have been there.
Yeah.
This is what Walt was getting at is we have been there. We have lived that. We have been the paycheck to paycheck people when we were younger. And we learned a lot of lessons in that time. And, sometimes we've made mistakes where we were trying to get ahead, thinking that we were doing the right thing and we really weren't. So we're hoping to kind of share with you guys a little bit about where we started out. And we were that, we really like when we moved into our first apartment, we came to an empty apartment. There was nothing in there. When I showed up, Walt was there before me. There were literally folding chairs in the living room, literally beach chairs in the living room. And
they didn't have Santa on the least. And I had Montgomery Ward was still around at that point. I had bought a TV and a surround system off of credit at that point. I had 2 cinder blocks holding up a big, large piece of wood and the TV with the speakers right next to it. And I had bought a $50 ugly, man, y'all, this table is so ugly. It was a glass.
We had that yet.
Well, I mean, this is all within pretty short succession.
When I showed up, that's what there was folding chairs in the living room, that TV on the wood and cinder blocks. And I think maybe you got a bed. I think you purchased a bed.
Maybe pots and pans.
And maybe, I think a few dishes.
Yeah.
But literally this apartment was empty. And I moved from we were moving to Virginia. I was in Connecticut. So I moved, what I could fit in my car is what came with me. And it was the clothes and some kitchen, used kitchen items that my mom and grandmother gave me to start out. And everything else we had to get on our own. Literally when I met him, he didn't even have a car and neither did I. I was borrowing my parents and he had just joined the Navy and come from Arizona to Connecticut. So he had no vehicle. He was borrowing other people's cars. And so we had to even try to, he had gotten a vehicle at that point. I still had to get my own vehicle. I didn't even have a car. I mean, we had nothing, and I'm talking nothing. And I think a little bit of credit card debt maybe when we started.
Yeah, like a couple $100. So how do you go from being 2 young kids in love on a hope, a dream, and a wing on a prayer without anything to their name, to owning 4 homes, to...
Well, we bought and sold
4 different homes.
We're in our 4th home.
By the way, we learned some really expensive lessons on those.
And several different apartments.
To raising 2 kids, to having nice things, to having a couple boats at times, to being able to actually leave corporate America 2 years ago and not have gotten a check since then, a corporate America check, to Stephanie not needing to work for the last 19 years and being at home with our family. How do you go from a wing and a prayer to that? We're going to talk about some of the tactical things that we did. So if you're out there and you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, good for you guys that you're where you're at today. We want you to know we've been where you're at. We understand what it's like to be where you're at. We understand what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck and feel like you're just digging out of a hole to break even every single month. But we want you to know that through the things that we're going to talk about today, you can dig out of that. You can get back to even, and then you can start growing your life to give yourself maximum flexibility. But it's going to take sacrifice and it's going to take delayed gratification to do it and real discipline when you're just sick and tired of having discipline financially and you just want to spend some money because we all feel like that sometimes.
Right. And I do think there's a point where you do have to reward yourself a little bit. When you do reach certain financial goals, you should reward yourself a little bit. It's kind of the incentive that keeps you going. And, otherwise you will go off the rails and end up doing worse because you didn't allow yourself something happy, something good that you can enjoy along the way. Cause it does get sometimes feels very relentless to be so disciplined and have to keep, like you said, delayed gratification and keep putting off those things you want. You got to give yourself a little bit of something along the way.
Yeah, celebrate the win too once you meet the benchmark. Because if you do that, then you're going to continue on to the next benchmark. But make sure the win is equivalent to what you can afford.
Yes.
Or brand new Yukon.
Yeah.
That's not
Don't
how
go
you
crazy.
celebrate the win, or you end up regressing. So how do you keep progressing? We're going to get into just this. How do you even start? Where do you even focus your attention at right now, today, if you feel like you're kind of drowning in that debt, or maybe you're just breaking even, or maybe you haven't done, maybe you've done pretty well, but you haven't done some of the things that we're going to talk about today. We really want to help you gain some basic proficiency and things that you should do and things that I promise you guys, this is what we still do in our relationship now. And this is how we got to this point. So the goal for us wasn't to stop and do something totally different or forget what got us here. The goal was to continue to do the things that got us here as we continue into the next phase of our life.
Also, we know there's couples out there. It's not necessarily that you don't make that much and that's why you're struggling. So there are some people out there who make really good money and still end up feeling like they don't have any money because
we know them.
they didn't get the financial, know-how to take care of that money. Because there's a lot of people who come into money that never knew how to budget and get there. They didn't have to because it was like a windfall, or people who win the lottery, people who get money left to them from a relative, or
it's like that show,
or
the lottery ruined my life.
Yeah, or they end up getting making a lot of money, but they didn't come from that. Like their parents didn't make a lot of money, so they never learned the financial principles that can help you live that rich life you want to have.
Yeah, and by the way, I like they said the rich life, because there's a Netflix show, How to Live Your Rich Life. Everybody's rich life looks different. For us, it's time, it's flexibility, it's the ability to create experiences for each other, for our kids, for our friends, not to drive a Lamborghini, not to own a 15,000 square foot house where we only use 1,000 square foot of it. It's not to impress other people and try to keep up with the Joneses. It is really about time, flexibility, and being able to just really enjoy our lives in a different way. And so, Steph, I want you to take the first bullet here. So we're going to start with these 3 key points that we said we were going to give you at the beginning. And I want you to start because this is something you really brought into the relationship, not something that I naturally did when I was younger.
Yeah, so you guys, I think the key fundamental thing to any finances, no matter who you are, no matter how poor, no matter how rich, you need a budget. You start with a budget. And, honestly, I thought this was kind of a common sense thing, but I realized it's not. There's a lot of people out there who were never taught how to budget their money. So
it wasn't common sense for me.
Right. They don't even really know what a budget is. And so, and I'll be honest with you, I used to, back in the old days, because we're old now, I used to actually write all of this down. I used to write it out on paper. And I still have a lot of my old budget sheets because I kept, and I'm very organized. I'm OCD about that kind of stuff. So I would write everything down and I held on to those for tax purposes and everything. So we could look back and see how we progressed and where we made mistakes. And I like to look back at it because it does show me where we came from too. And these days, Walt made me get into the 21st century, and he was like, there are things called Excel spreadsheets. You should probably make one of those.
And by the way, it's not like I'm a master at Excel guy. You can do some basic things in Excel, like how much something cost or how much money you spent on a bill minus how much money you made. Gives you an outcome for how much is left, plus or minus your monthly budget. So there's pretty easy ways to do this. And there's a lot of free software now that you guys can utilize in order to help you start to make this budget.
Yeah, so now we do use an Excel spreadsheet and same thing, but you can look back and I've gotten more detailed with it. But to just the basics is write down what all of your bills are. What are all the expenses that you have? Write down all your expenses. And then you also write down, well, how much money do we have coming in? So what is your paycheck and what other money do you have that comes in every month?
Mm-hmm.
And then you subtract those expenses from what comes in, and your bills should always get paid first. That's fundamental. Pay your bills first.
Yep. Pay your savings and pay your bills before you go pay a business for dinner.
Well, and then what's left is what they call discretionary income. What's left is what you have to spend on what you want. And then even out of that money, you have to decide, well, I should probably save a little bit of this. It's always good to have a savings. So I have cash on hand for emergencies. And then you have what you can actually spend on the things you want to spend it on. And then even then you've got to budget. Well, how much is going to go to, eating out? How much is going to go to entertainment? How much is going to go towards a vacation? Whatever. We all have many things we want to spend it on. So that's where you have to sit down and make these decisions. And as a couple, you really have to do this together.
Yeah, we know. We just talked to a couple recently. They're making, I don't know, probably about $200,000 a year, 180 to maybe 220, somewhere in there. And they're not on the same. First of all, they have separate accounts, which for Stephanie and I, we always recommend as a couple, you join bank accounts. It just increases the level of trust. It increases the level of transparency. And it's a lot easier to come together on the second bullet. We're going to talk about common goals here in a second. What we found, because we started sharing bank accounts, but before I did with Stephanie, when we first moved in together, I just knew in my head how much money my bills were. I knew how much money I had left. And I kept it kind of at that level. But I was always like at the max of what I made.
I'm still a fan of writing it down.
Stephanie was still writing it down and doing a budget at that point. Yeah. Because I went on deployments and because I was gone a lot, Stephanie just took over the household bills for us because I didn't ever want her to feel like she didn't know what was going on with our bills. And then all of a sudden she's thrown into having to take care of them when I went on deployment. But guys, I remember just in our budget, I remember finishing paying off my GI bill and I got $100 pay raise. It was costing me $100 a month at the time. And I got $100 pay raise. Man, I remember that first check when I went to the ATM to see how much money I had on that payday before we all went out that night. And I was rich, man. I was like, no, I got $100 extra every single month and it's going to be great. And I could buy some more drinks because I didn't have a budget. More importantly, it's like Stephanie said, she walked you through the budget. I didn't have a goal for how I wanted to spend that money. I didn't even know where or how I wanted to spend it, except for, well, what the hell? I got some more money. I'm going to spend it on some fun.
But I know this seems simple, but many people do not do this. And this is fundamental to me. This is fundamental. You have to make a budget. If you don't make a budget, you don't really know what you have. A lot of people, they're just like, oh, they get a paycheck and they just spend it however, like they feel like spending it. I'm not going to say who, but there was someone who came into our life. We were probably in our late 20s, or I was in my late 20s. He was probably 30. And we had someone who came into our life and they had the kind of job where they were just getting, what would you call that? Kind of just earning tip money all the time. And so there wasn't a set amount of money she was getting every week. It was, she didn't get a regular paycheck. It was like, a service type of job where you earn tips. And I asked her about a budget and she had no clue what I was talking about. She had never made a budget and she was older than me. And I couldn't believe it. So I literally sat her down and showed her what I do to budget my money. It's really just, assets minus expenses kind of thing, where it's like your money in minus what your bills are. Well, she never done that. And she didn't have an exact amount coming in every week, so she could never really do that or plan for that, or she did, just didn't think she could. Well, at this point in her life, she was changing into a regular job where now she was going to get a paycheck. So it required budgeting because she wasn't going to be able to just go earn the money as she needed it or whenever she wanted to. Because she was always like, well, I could just go work a shift and earn this many more $100 and I'll just to pay it if I had to. That's how she operated. And I know there's a lot of people out there doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And they don't actually, but when you have a fixed income, you have to budget. And we've always lived on. We had a paycheck that we knew how much we were getting, so we could budget our money.
Right. So once you build the budget, like Steph talked about, it's expenses minus the revenue, how much money you have coming in, gives you an amount. If you're in the negative after that, then you got to figure out how do you start to minimize and limit your expenses. You got to delay gratification before you start to buy things more expensive that you can't really afford. But if you don't have a budget, you don't have the awareness of what that looks like. And how do you actually talk about it as a couple if you don't even know? So the first thing is sitting down as a couple and building your budget and having the candid conversation and the real conversation about where am I at right now? Where are we at as a couple right now? That's number one. Number two is then you got to build some goals and some common goals for how you want to spend that money. I cannot tell you how many arguments this will prevent in your relationship by getting on the same page when it comes to your finances and when it comes to where you're going to spend the large majority of your money. That doesn't mean you can't go spend some little things here and some little things over here based upon what each person likes to buy. That just means 95% of your money is accounted for within the budget. And you got to have some short and some long-term goals. Because if you're in the hole or breaking even right now, when you sit down to write these goals, right now it might just be digging out of the hole. We had some really good friends of ours. They were always just every month it was such a struggle and there was strain on their relationship and they were arguing about money and not even because they were mad at each other, just because they were stressed, man. So we sat down with them and they told us they had $40,000. This is a few years ago too. $40,000 in credit card debt, paying 18% interest, making minimum payments and never seeing it go down. But they didn't even have a goal for how they were going to dig out of the hole. It wasn't until they sat down, they wrote a budget out, they actually were real about where they were at in the moment that they can sit and say, okay, we both actually want to get rid of this credit card debt. Let's talk about how we're going to do that.
Well, I know a lot of you, if you're new young couples that come together, you might have student loan debt. You might each be coming with your own student loan debt. You might each have credit card debt. You have these different debts you're bringing in. Now you're combining and you're facing that together. So you have to really talk about, okay, what's priority that we pay off first? And most people start with whatever the highest interest rate debt is. Get rid of that first and work from there. I know when we first got married, I never was allowed that much of a, what do you call it?
Credit limit.
Yeah, credit limit because I didn't make enough. But Walt had a little bit more because he was in the Navy. So, and he had put my engagement ring on his credit card. I think so.
Man, I couldn't.
Now I come into the relationship. But now I've got this credit card debt.
Man, I couldn't afford that. I think I paid like $1,500 or $2,000. Now that was 24 years ago. So don't make fun of me. And I was a E4 guys. But yeah, I didn't have $500 in the bank.
We got married and now that became my debt also.
That's right.
So now we have to face that debt together. And this is the thing. I know a lot of you out there have separate incomes and have separate debts, but you're together as a couple. So really you can't ignore each other's. You need to come together and talk about what both of you have and what's the priority to pay off.
And be honest about it. Man, if you screwed up and you got something on a credit card and you're coming into a relationship and you guys are getting serious and it's time to have this conversation about your finances, just be honest. There's nothing that adds more shame
Mm.
than lying about something. There's nothing that makes you feel more guilty, and that will bleed into your relationship in a really negative way. Not to mention when your spouse finds out that you really had an extra $50,000 in debt, but you didn't say nothing about it.
That is, I love that you said that, because the honesty is the biggest thing. Like, you can't be hiding, you have this over there, and they don't know that you have that financial thing that you're paying, and they're wondering where the money's going. And it's going to cause a lot of arguments and, distrust in your relationship if
Mhm.
you don't come clean about those things. Because we watched that show we were talking about on Netflix. There was a couple on there, and he was making some investments into, I don't know, it wasn't gambling, but it was like some kind of stock that was aggressive where, you know,
He was taking a lot of risk on how he was investing his
Mhm.
money to try to just get rich quick versus playing the long game
And
on
she
it.
didn't know he was investing in it. And then when she found out on TV as her she
Yeah.
was like, what? Like, wow.
He lost $80,000.
Yeah, and it was a lot of money.
And it was during the time when the AMC stocks and all that stuff, if you guys know anything about that, where it was almost a viral thing that was happening and people were making a lot of money. Well, he got in late, lost 80 grand. During the show, he
Yeah.
comes clean about it. They stopped and they didn't resume filming the show. That specific couple didn't. And that might have actually caused a divorce because it's not the losing the money, man. That's painful too. Trust me,
Right.
we've lost some pretty big amount of money at certain points in our marriage too. It's the lie and the hiding and the deceit that comes with it. So have that conversation, because you can't build common goals. You can't even do your budget without being real about your finances and where everybody's at in their relationship on those finances.
And you can't thrive together if you guys aren't sharing what you each have. Because I know it's a little different for us because we've always shared our money. And for most of our relationship, we only had one income. Walt was the breadwinner. I stayed at home. So there was only one income and we've always shared it. We always had to talk about the money because we had to. But I know there's a lot of you out there that have two incomes and you're keeping separate bank accounts and you're not necessarily telling each other what you're spending on. And it's very hard to move together and thrive together if you're not sharing that stuff together.
Right. And your common goals, guys, this doesn't mean everything's got to be about paying the debt off. We just know the value of paying your debt off and have an extraordinarily minimal debt. You could be planning, we do it now. We want to plan a vacation. We want to maybe get another vehicle at some point. We want to do different things in our life. Maybe we want to get a new piece of furniture. There's things that we want to do that is a common goal as a couple that we have that discussion about. And then we're real about how long it might take to get there. We might need to save for 6 months. We might need to pay some debt off first before we allow ourselves to do something else. But it always starts with our bills get paid. We pay our bank account, so we have some emergency funds and savings. They say you should have 6 months in savings. Those are our baseline goals. After that, those goals ebb and flow depending on the season that we're in and our wants and needs in those moments. But they never come before the two priorities that I just talked about. And then after that, so we create these short-term, we create these long-term goals. We really have these critical, really pivotal conversations for our relationship as far as budgeting goes. And then it's the third thing we're going to talk about is you got to have some checkpoints to stay in alignment to ensure that you're really moving towards those goals together, because it's easy as life happens for us. We just had to pay $1,500 to get a tumor removed from our dog's foot. We didn't expect that. We just had to pay $3,000 because our air conditioner unit was growing some mold because the pan that held the water and makes it drip out had broke on one part and we didn't catch it. So the humidity and the heat was making it grow mold. So it cost $3,000 to clean it. Life's going to happen, like no doubt, 100%. Things are going to kick you in your rear end financially. The difference is it sucked. It was still stressful, but it didn't cause us stress necessarily. It just sucked because we're financially in a place where we've been smart and saved this money and had these common goals on being okay when something in life kicks us in our rear end. $600 this month to get the reservoir fixed in her car on her radiator. That sucks, but it doesn't destitute us.
Right.
Because I also know what it was like to be young and have to buy new tires for our vehicle
Mm-mm.
and have to take out a loan because we didn't even have $500 to get new tires. Not to mention tires cost $500 a piece now, but back then I could buy 4 for $500, and we didn't even have the money for that. So we learned the valuable lessons from the moments that we were the most broke to make sure that we don't end in that again. And then we check in with each other every month.
Yeah, so just like he was saying, I think we learn from those times where, like he said, we lived that paycheck to paycheck, and it was like, oh, it was hard to believe that needing new tires would set us back to where it was like, oh my God, where are we going to get this? And we had to take out a loan to pay
More
for
debt.
tires. And it was like, I don't want to be in this position. I don't want to be stressed over this. So then you're always feeling like stressed at all times because it's like, if the next thing comes, and you know it will, we all know life happens and you know that next thing's coming. So it's just a matter of when. And when it does, I don't want to stress over how am I ever going to pay for that. That is where I think for Walt and I, it's been, our goal has always been financial freedom. And by that, I mean, exactly that, is having enough money to where all the everyday life things that happen, we don't constantly live in a state of stress. We can live in peace because we know we have the money to pay for it. That will never set us back. That's the point we had been striving for. And we had that delayed gratification and all of that. We really did institute all those things because of not wanting to live in that stress. We wanted to have the peace and freedom to live comfortably and live life and not worry about any little thing that's going to happen to us. Because just like he said, and we live in a totally different place now where we saved enough money, we have enough cash on hand that when these things come up, yeah, it sucks, but it's like a bump in the road and we just keep going and we don't even really think twice about it because we have the money to pay for it. Whereas we know what it's like though
Right.
when we didn't.
Right.
And that stung enough that it made us get serious about this and set these goals and sit down together, and we check in all the time. Like, I used to check in about twice a month because I did it every paycheck. We get paid every 2 weeks. And so I would, every 2 weeks when we got paid and I paid those bills, I always went to Walt and talked about, okay, I just paid the bills. This is where we're at. This is how much money there is. Oh, there was like, we kind of had more expenses this month. So we might need to kind of watch it next month or whatever it is. But I always check in with him every time I was doing it so frequently. And now it's kind of more like once a month because our pay's a little different and stuff, but and the way we set up our bills. But I still every month check in and let him know, hey, this is how much we have. You know, we have these expenses coming up or whatever. But we talk about, or sometimes I get a little stressed, like, ooh, we spent a lot more money last month than I thought we would. And, you know, we really need to kind of save this month or and that's how we move forward. But we check in regularly, and you need to with your finances because stuff does come up all the time. Like he just said, we had so many things come up in the last couple of months that were totally unexpected, and luckily we have the money to pay for it. But it still is like, we start seeing that savings go down, and then we're like, okay, well, how can we make up for that coming up? You know, we try to make changes, or you know, we'll cut back on this month and or whatever it is so that we can make up the money, or you know, we won't take that vacation because we just need to get ahead. You know, but you have to make some of those decisions. They're not easy, and it requires you to have some discipline, and it really does require you to make sacrifices. We made a lot of sacrifices to get ahead financially when we were young because we didn't want to keep living that way. But somewhere you have to make the sacrifice. It doesn't just happen. It's not just, you're not just going to come into money, and you can't just hope and pray for that. You have to make changes to get there.
So look, guys, 3 things we talked about you can do now so you don't end up in the 37% of couples who end up filing divorce because of financial problems. Make a budget, create some common goals and some benchmarks for where you want to go financially in your relationship. And the last thing is to have those checkpoints along the way. They're vital and critical to making sure that you're both on the same page. Here's the reality. Everybody's rich life looks different, whatever that looks like for you. For Stephanie and I, especially as we've gotten a little bit older, it's minimizing debt. It's doing the things that you have to do to ensure that you minimize the debt that you have, which will minimize the stress. But more importantly to that, it will give you the freedom to do the things that you really want to do. We made a lot of sacrifices in our life, to include being in the military for 20 years and all the deployments and all the time away and all the sacrifice that it took to do that, to create some passive income now that helps subsidize our life. But without being smart about where we're spending our money and how we're spending our money and being on the same page and creating the goals, I couldn't have left corporate America 2 years ago. Stephanie she wouldn't have been able to be a stay-at-home mom for the last 19 years. Because we made those decisions early and often, and because we sacrificed, because we delayed gratification, we've gotten to the point now where we're living our rich life, and that's having the time and the freedom to do what we enjoy the most, to create the experiences that we want to create with each other and with our family. That's the beauty of what's waiting on the other side of that. And I don't care if you're 20 years old, just starting out now, or you're 44 years old like I was when I left corporate America and retired, or you're 47 years old like I am now. Whatever that life looks like for you is attainable, but it's going to take some aggressive discipline to make sure that you fulfill that. And that's why we had this episode today for our 50th episode on that financial awareness and what you need to do to elevate your relationship because of it. Because we have lived that entire spectrum over the course of our life to get to the point where we're at today. We know what it takes to do it. And we want that for you. And we want that for your relationship and your marriage, because it does really create an extraordinarily powerful union when you can get on the page around this.
Yeah, the only thing I'm going to add to that, because Paul did a great job of summing that up, is get on the same page financially together. That's the biggest thing I hope you take away from this episode, is that you build those goals together. Don't do it separate. Don't hide things. Be honest and open and transparent in talking about your financial goals as a couple, because this is the foundation for your relationship. Everything you can do in your relationship is based on that. And you're just going to, you can eliminate that stress and those arguments and all the conflict by getting on the same page with this and really prioritizing this. It is that important. And so do it now. The start of the year is the best time. Do that reset. Sit down together. Have the tough conversation. Get real. Get on the same page. Set goals for what you want to do with that money. It's everything. I know for us, we had to talk about like college for our kids and all of that stuff. Like, there's going to be some sacrifice involved, but man, we can definitely tell you the sacrifice is worth it. The sacrifice pays off, and you will see huge rewards if you stay disciplined and consistent with your finances.
So look, another way that you can commit to building a stronger, more powerful marriages is go to our website, legacydrivenmarriages.com. Sign up for our weekly newsletter. It has a ton of marriage tips in there, real tactical advice like we talked about on here that you can start utilizing today to become that power couple that you know you're capable of becoming. So thanks for joining us today again, guys. And until the next time,
get into the arena of your marriage, keep fighting for your relationship, and keep elevating your generational legacy. And we'll see you guys next Tuesday.
Let's go.